What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Everything Paranormal Show with your hosts, Josh Morris and Stacy Talich. So tonight, I think it's going to be a really fun night. Normally, we do a lot of discussion about ghosts and, some about cryptids. Again, this is the Everything Paranormal Show, so we try to cover different parts of the spectrum. And one part of that spectrum we don't cover enough of, in my opinion, is probably like UFOs and aliens and that side of what I consider paranormal. It's above normal. It's not. UFOs are not normal in our, normal everyday life, right? So, with that being said, one of the main focuses today is a man called Bob Lazar. And being that we're in 2022, and he came out in like May of 1989, and he was almost like that first whistleblower to come out of Area 51, so to speak. When I say Area 51, keep in mind, there's multiple test sites, and I'm not going to get super specific. He actually worked allegedly in S4, okay, which is, I guess, south, I think, of Groom Lake or something. But in any case, I'm not going to get super specific. I'm just going to refer as Area 51 in general in the future. So nobody get all crazy about technical terms, okay? But we are going to take a live discussion. Stacy and I, we're going to dive into some things. We're also going to be reviewing what Bob Lazar said when he came out in 1989, and we're going to look at the goal of this video is not so much to try to debunk Bob Lazar. We do want to look at maybe both sides of the story, but we want to look at a few things of why maybe you should believe this guy. We'll look at a few different things. So I'm excited. Can't wait to get started. Stacy, a quick question for you. Do you believe in UFOs?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I haven't actually seen any with my own eyes that I'm aware of. But, because there's stories of people who get the MIB mind wipe. They, get abducted and things like that, and they have no memory of it. And then until something traumatic happens, and all of a sudden, everything comes out of the woodwork. To date, my knowledge is I've never seen one with my own eyes. So.
I'm not sure. I don't think I have, but I can't say I haven't because I'm not sure. I think there was one time I saw something in the sky, and it seemed to just take an abrupt, unnatural just speed and things. And I said something to my grandmother. I was in the car. And I think she just kind of mentioned something else. I don't know. But so I'm not sure. It could have been. Who knows? But consciously as an adult, I have not, but I do believe. And Bob, it's so good to see you in the chat. He said live discussions are far better than yes. And he's seen two once in the Navy. Yes, Bob. And for those of you, Bob Fountain has been on the show. And we have talked about that experience when he was in the Navy, and you definitely need to go back in my videos. It's a while back, but it's worth digging through my stuff and going through and watching it. Trust me. So, but yes. So we are, like I said, we are going to be diving into this stuff today. So what I'm going to do is we are going to pull up the original deal here. There we go. And I'm going to go ahead and play this.
This week in our series of reports on UFOs, we learned a number of things. That not everybody who sees a UFO is crazy, that our government has lied about UFO information, that it's withheld UFO files, and even spied on UFO witnesses. We've also heard from scientists who say life elsewhere in the universe is virtually a certainty. And we heard that the majority of Americans believe that UFOs are real and come from space.
Now, I do want to preface it. I will be stopping the video every so often. Again, kind of maybe for some copyright purposes, but also because we do want to dissect a little bit of this. But again, keep in mind, what's great about these time capsules, again, this is 1989, right? Spring of 89. This is not like, you got to remember all the stuff that's happened in the last 20 years with social media and all these things. This is before all that, folks. Okay, the internet was not like a major thing, and all this other stuff. So just keep some of the context in mind of this. And that sometimes, to me, that makes it even more impressive.
Tonight, in part 5 of his report, George Knapp introduces us to a local man with an amazing and disturbing story. George.
Gary and Mary Ruth, we've been working on this story for a long time, and we'll tell you right up front that it's going to be hard to swallow at first. This week, we've heard the contention of UFO researchers that there is a secret government within our government. While that may be hard to believe coming from the UFO perspective, we've certainly learned in Watergate and the Iran-Contra scandal that factions within our government can and do pursue their own hidden agendas outside of the law, outside the control of Congress, or the knowledge of the American people.
I want to pause that real quick because, and I'm sorry, guys, I know we're watching this, but we got to talk about some things. I mean, I love the fact that he brought up like Watergate and stuff and talked about the secret government within government. This is the kind of shit that we're dealing with nowadays. Okay, so think about this, folks. I mean, this is time capsules back. So when y'all think that some of this conspiracy stuff could not happen, guys, it's been happening, and they were busted back then, and we're still dealing with shadow government stuff.
Yeah, they called it the deep state then. I mean, it deep, dark, deep state.
Yeah. So anyway, I just had to throw that in there because, I mean, you know.
This is exactly the type of operation we'll hear about tonight. It's a chilling scenario with worldwide implications that may have its roots right here. Area 51, that mysterious corner of the Nevada test site, is no longer much of a secret. The fact that secretive things go on here is a given, even to the Soviets, who make daily spy flights over the facility to take a peek at what's going on. These photos, never before shown in public, are about as close as anyone will ever come to seeing what the place looks like again.
And by the way, folks, remember, you can't even get this close because at the time, because of Bob Lazar, once this came out, the military immediately went on this land grab. In fact, it was a pretty big deal. It was almost, hold on. Hello? They're still there? I don't know. Hold on. All right. Hold on. All right, hold on. All right, sorry guys. I gotta go check on something. It's like, anyways, I'll let you watch the video.
The dry bed of Groom Lake, corrugated metal building, a 3-mile-long runway, and some highly sophisticated radar and detection equipment. It's been known by many names over the years: Dreamland, the Ranch, the Skunk Works. If ever there was a place to test a secret new technology, this is it. And that's exactly what's been done here for decades. Area 51 is where Francis Gary Powers and the other U-2 pilots were trained in the 50s, and where the U-2 itself was developed. The SR-71 spy planes that spotted Soviet missiles in Cuba in the early 60s were also developed at 51. 51 is where stealth technology was nurtured, where Star Wars devices are still tested, and where all manner of CIA monkey business has been plotted and refined. It's the perfect place for secret things. But of course, that's no secret. 51 is ringed by the forbidden vastness of the Nevada test site, by the looming Groom Mountains, and by sparsely populated desert expanses. The few people who do live out here have no love lost for the military, but they're conservative, patriotic, and they mind their own business. You ever see stuff you can't explain? Sure. Lots of stuff. Care to elaborate? No. On any given night at the Rachel Bar and Grill, you might find 3 or 4 people who work at Area 51. There, amid the flowing Budweisers and cowboy hats. You might find them, but they aren't going to talk to you. Not about the things they've seen over the mountains. A steady trickle of curiosity seekers flows through here. Strangers drawn by strange stories of lights in the night sky. Their questions also go unanswered. No one who's worked at Dreamland has ever publicly acknowledged what so many people have suspected for years, that alien technology is being tested in the Nevada desert. The speculation first surfaced in documents obtained by UFO researchers, documents about something called Project Aquarius. The documents, allegedly prepared for an organization called MJ-12, state that a program to fly recovered alien spacecraft was established in 1972 and is continuing in Nevada. The National Security Agency has confirmed it does have a Project Aquarius. but denies it has anything to do with flying saucers. NSA will not say what Project Aquarius is. Speculation was heightened in 1984 when the Air Force seized nearly 90,000 acres around Groom Lake.
Now, so, and again, this is what I was wanting to talk about is, that land grab. They're getting ready to talk about where the government seized a bunch of land because people were starting to be able to go to like the mountaintops and like look right down into the test facilities and stuff. So they're like, man, they just like did this massive land grab, and it was pretty controversial because it was pretty much illegal, I believe, but they grabbed a bunch of land around there just to make sure they could keep people pushed back. So
yeah, it was under Bill Clinton, an executive order that he made, and it was literally on the campaign trail. He, was talking about wanting to find out about UFOs and aliens and all of that when he was on the campaign trail with Jay Leno, with the saxophone and all of that. And, as soon as he gets into office, he signs an executive order that makes it impossible for anybody to even approach the mountain range to look over the horizon 20 miles into the base. It was a real slap in the face at the time. So,
right. And of course, Bob threw in there when the captain of our ship said we would go to prison if we discussed it. That tells me the government is well knowledgeable of what is going on. And that's true. And we see that reflected in quite a bit of things. And you'll see that even in here too. So, all right.
The action was, by most accounts, illegal. During congressional hearings about the land grab, Congressman John Seiberling grilled the military about the legal authority used in the action and was told the authority was at a much, much higher level than the Air Force. Seiberling asked what authority is higher than the laws of the United States. The Air Force official said he could respond, but only in a closed briefing. In 1980,
yeah, you hear that, folks? There is an authority higher than the military, but they could not say in public. Okay, so what does that tell you, folks?
Well, they told you who it was too in the Project Aquarius, MJ12, Majestic 12. It's a council of 12. I mean, X-Files did a whole thing on that, where 12 guys who aren't accountable to anybody, the smoking man, to basically run things inside the government, the deep state.
Yeah. All right. I'm just trying to point this stuff out, folks. Don't get mad at me. We're just trying to waking you up here.
1987, when the Air Force sought to renew its stranglehold on the Groom Range, news articles once again mentioned the talk about alien spacecraft, and subsequent articles in national magazines quoted.
Did you turn off the sound?
Saucer story.
Well, there are several.
Do what, Stacey? Oh.
I wasn't getting any sound.
Oh, did I mute it?
I think so.
Oh, maybe I muted it when I muted my microphone. All right, let's go back. We'll just go back a little bit. Sorry, guys. Sometimes I think we were right about there.
1987, when the Air Force sought to renew its stranglehold on the Groom Range, news articles once again mentioned the talk about alien spacecraft, and subsequent articles in national magazines quoted unnamed sources about things of alien origin flying in Nevada, things that would make filmmaker George Lucas drool. Despite the speculation, no one who knew Area 51 from the inside ever talked publicly about the saucer stories.
Well, there are several, actually 9 flying saucers, flying discs that are out there of extraterrestrial origin.
That's Bob Lazar.
Shadowy Dennis drew international attention. Portions were broadcast by radio in 6 European countries and in a nationally televised TV special in Japan.
Actually 9 flying saucers, flying discs.
Despite numerous inquiries and feelers, Dennis has remained anonymous until now. His real name is Robert Lazar, a young scientist with eclectic interests. The choice of Dennis was an inside joke. He says that's the name of his superior at Groom Lake.
So, yeah, and this is what we're going to start diving into as you see this story unfold. I don't want to just completely give away. I know that there's going to be a lot of you guys that has probably either seen this. A lot of us have seen this over the years, or in my case, I've always kind of came and gone on the Bob Lazar UFO stuff. It's like there'd be, this time where I would be really into things like that, and I would, watch the videos, listen to them talk, listen to some other UFO experts. I'd be into it for a while, and then I would like get back into ghost hunting and do other things, and then I'd come back later on. So for me, it's been kind of off and on over the years, and right now I kind of revisited it recently, and I was talking to Stacy about it. He's like, "Yeah, man," So, and I know Stacy, you said you've been kind of following Bob Lazar from the beginning, right?
Yeah, well, at least since the mid '90s, he was on Art Bell's show quite a bit. So was George Knapp. George Knapp actually got Art Bell to get into this stuff with the aliens and the paranormal and all the mysterious stuff through this, Bob Lazar. Before that, Art Bell was, he was doing politics and sports,
right,
over the radio. And because of George Knapp and Bob Lazar, the story just got really interesting, and he just, created a cottage industry in late night radio, starting from here. And mid '90s was when I got caught up with it, because I was doing, third shift work and sitting at a desk at the same time. There was nothing else to do but listen to Art Bell. So,
all right, yeah, and we'll listen to what Bob has to say here.
Wasn't a joke to Dennis.
He called right after and said, "Do you have any idea what we're going to do to you now?" And I said, "Well, no." And he hung up the phone.
Lazar's story is by any standards fantastic. He says he's telling it in order to protect himself. He says he was hired to work at an area called S4, which is a few miles south of Groom Lake. At S4, he says, are flying saucers, antimatter reactors, and other working examples of technology that is seemingly beyond human capabilities.
Right, this came from somewhere else. I mean, as bizarre as that is to believe, but I mean, it's there. I saw it. I know what the current state of the art is in physics, and it can't be done.
Checking out Lazar's credentials proved to be a difficult task. He says he earned degrees in physics and electronics, but the schools we contacted say they've never heard of him. He also said he worked as a physicist at Los Alamos National Lab, where he experimented with one of the world's largest particle beam accelerators, a half-mile-long behemoth capable of generating 700 million volts. Los Alamos officials told us they had no records of a Robert Lazar ever working there. They were either mistaken or were lying. A 1982 phone book from the lab lists Lazar right there among the other scientists and technicians.
So this is really interesting, folks, because you're going to want to pay attention to this part if you're not familiar with the story. But again, we're going to get into some more. Trust me, this is important for us to watch his claims and some of this stuff together. That way, we're all on the same page in this video. And but hopefully you like it anyways. I mean, even if you've seen this and you haven't seen it for a while, it's really good to check the stuff out again. But folks, even right off the bat, you're already seeing where, like, they're taking away his credentials. They're saying that he never worked there, but yet there's an employee directory here. You're getting ready to see more, folks.
Cancel culture back in the day.
Right.
Alamos newspaper profiled Lazar and his interest in jet cars. It too mentioned his employment at the lab as a physicist. We called Los Alamos again. An exasperated official told us he still had no records on Lazar. EG&G, which is where Lazar says he was interviewed for the job at S4, also has no records. It's as if someone has made him disappear.
Well, they're trying to make me a non-person.
Explain. You called where?
Well, the schools that I went to, the hospital that I was born at, past job, and essentially nothing comes up with my name in it.
He smiled, but out of futility, knowing the whole thing must sound ridiculous. According to Lazar, his employer was the United States Navy. He says he and other government employees would gather near EG&G, fly to Groom Lake, and then a very few people would get into a bus with blacked out or no windows and drive to S4.
When you get off the bus, what do you see?
Sure. Now, before we get into what he sees, again, as you guys are starting to see, they're wiping his identity. And back then, keep in mind, everything was paper still. We had file cabinets with files, not just digital. Not everything was on computers. And even what stuff was on computers, it wasn't necessarily connected to mass cloud storage and almost infinite ways to get lost in the internet. No, we're talking about a very isolated records that the government can immediately go to and start discrediting you. We're going to cover a little bit more about that as well, because again, I want to point something out, because I recently saw somebody try to debunk some of his schooling, and I'm going to point something out. We'll talk about it.
Very interesting building. It's got a slope of probably about 30 degrees, which are hangar doors. And it has textured paint on it, but it looks like sand. It's made to look like the side of the mountain that it's in, whether it's to disguise it from satellite photographs or what.
He says he was never told exactly what he'd be working on, but figured it had something to do with advanced propulsion. On his first day, he was told to read a series of briefings and immediately realized how advanced the propulsion was.
The power source is an antimatter reactor. They run gravity amplifiers. There's actually two parts to the drive mechanism. It's a bizarre technology. There's no physical hookup between any of the systems in there. They use gravity as a wave, using waveguides, almost like microwaves.
It took a while, Lazar says, before he actually saw one of the flying discs. However, there were hints everywhere.
Right. They had a poster, and it looked like a commercial poster almost, like it was lithographed, and you could buy it at a Kmart or something. But they were all over the place, and it had the disc that I coined the term the sport model was lifted off the ground about 3 feet at area S4 on the dry lake there, and the catch on the bottom said they're here. And those are just all over the place.
Later, he got to see the real thing.
When I was let in, it was the first time I saw the sport model in the hangar sitting down, and I was told they could have walked me to the front door, but they purposely wanted to walk me by it. I was told not to say anything and just keep my eyes forward and walk past the disc into the office area. And I did, and as we went by it, I just kind of stuck my hands on it just to run it alongside the thing. And, that was about the smallest time. After that, I got to see it.
Now, I'm not going to pull up everything he said, but he does go into some more detail. And we're going to talk more about the future of Bob Lazar, like the aftermath of him coming out. And of course, when he did touch it, he said it was cool to the touch. He believed it was like a metal, possibly porcelain type feel, by the way. So, and he did get sort of scolded a little bit by one of the security. Was like, hey, like, so anyways, there's a few more. If you guys ever wanted to know some more in-depth thing, one thing I would also recommend is, not right now, but he did the Joe Rogan podcast in fairly modern times here, obviously, and it's really good. He, Joe Rogan presses him on a lot of not presses him, but he really coaches him into sharing a lot of details and stuff. So it's really good stuff.
Yeah, I actually looked off the down and off right.
But you also, in between that, you saw more than one.
Yeah. The hangars are all connected together, and there are large bay doors between each one. And there were 9 total that I saw, each one being different. Like they had the assortment pack.
Security at S4 was oppressive, Lazar says, and his superiors used fear and intimidation almost as a brainwashing tool.
Did everything physically hurt me.
Put a gun to your head?
Yeah.
And said what? Actually put a gun to your head?
Well, they did that even in the original security briefing. They had guards there with M16. The guys slamming their finger into my chest, screaming in my ear. People pointing weapons at me. Like I said, it's not a good place to work.
That fear factor would surface later. Lazar agreed to undergo a polygraph exam as part of this report. Polygrapher Ron Slay asked about the technology Lazar had seen.
Did you knowingly lie when you said you had actually seen anti-gravity propulsion in operation?
No.
The results of this exam were inconclusive. Lazar appeared to be truthful on one test, deceitful on a second. Slay recommended that a second examiner be brought in. Polygrapher Terry Tavernetti runs a corporate security operation and is a former Los Angeles police officer. He put Lazar Lazar through 4 tests and concluded there was no attempt to deceive.
And I left there thinking that.
Keep in mind, folks, 4 tests, 4 more tests. And even the original test was inconclusive, and you got to remember this guy's under a lot of stress too. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
I feel we do have some credibility to what the subject had to say. And that's when I went to some of my colleagues.
Tavernetti sent the test results to a 3rd polygrapher who agreed the results appeared truthful. The charts were then sent to a 4th examiner who did not agree, suggesting Lazar might be relating information he'd learned from someone else. The polygraphers conferred and decided they would not issue a final statement on truthfulness until more specific testing can be conducted, and that's where it stands. Tavernetti believes that difficulty in determining Lazar's truthfulness stems from the fear that was drilled into him.
I think we're talking about a subject here that is so far-reaching, and it is so emotional. And when you're dealing with emotions, this is polygraph, because we're dealing with polygraph, you're looking at fear. The fear of getting caught telling a lie because something bad will happen to you if you do.
Well, I am telling the truth. I've tried to prove that. What's going on up there could be the most important event in history. You're talking about contact, physical contact and proof from another system, another planet, another intelligence. That's got to be the biggest event in history, period.
And it's real.
And it's real and it's there. And I had an extremely small part in it, but I'm convinced that what I saw is absolute proof of that. There is no way we could have created those systems. There's no way we could have made the discs, the power supplies, anything to go with them.
Now, I want to go ahead. Let's take this off right now, only because they're just going to kind of wrap up and everything. But I want to go into a few things, and then I'm going to let Stacy kind of start diving into some stuff too. I just wanted to kind of guide this along as we went through for a second. But keep in mind, and like I said, this guy, who knows, right? I'm only here to take an objective look, but at the same time, I've already kind of taken that objective look, and I believe this guy. Out of all the crazies out there, all the UFO people, there's some really crazy people out there. There is. But when you look at Bob Lazar and you look at his story, you look at, if you really dive into some details and you start putting things together, and we'll talk about those things, I really feel like this guy is telling the truth. Now, again, that's my opinion. But so initially, I would like to start with, and there's more, if you folks want to know more details of like his days, like when he was there for about 6 months, I believe, is what he was, from what I gather. And he had a lab partner, and he replaced another scientist that was killed, apparently trying to dismantle or something, one of these anti-gravity devices. And I guess he tried to stupidly cut into it or something. I don't know. It's supposedly this is what we gather, but there's a lot of great information. So the first thing I want to start out with is, Stacy, just real quick, what do you kind of generalize? Where do you put Bob Lazar?
I put him on a level 10 on telling the truth. He's the only person to date that is, as a whistleblower, even so-called whistleblowers, that has been 100% truthful in everything that he's said. And, he's an uber nerd who's not particularly well versed in deception. He's a scientist, and just like accountants, and scientists, and computer programmers, they all have a OCD, almost like on the spectrum of not being relatable. But at the same time, they don't understand deception. All they understand is truth, false, dichotomy. They are very binary in the way that they think. And he displays this at every level. even when he had his own YouTube channel there for a while, where he was talking about some of the projects that he was working on, it was all very, binary in him telling the truth.
Right.
Other people that have come up of late, they're very sensationalist. I don't know if you watch Gaia at all. It's another streaming service like Paraflix. They have a lot of the new agey people who weren't able to get on like Ancient Aliens programming, and they have their own shows and different things like that.
Right.
Some of them, one of the early adopters in the programming was David Wilcock and Corey Good. They were a team like what we're doing here. And supposedly, Wilcock was the one that was narrating and doing the actual leading of the story like you do. And
Right.
Corey Good would testify of his experience of being inside the super secret alien hybrid program with the United States government, where we have like huge starships, and there's like 57 different aliens that we're in league with, and this the lizard people and the blue avians and all these different things. He would give these very elaborate stories,
Right.
and people swallowed it, hook, line, and sinker. And it was David Wilcock. I don't know whether he knew it or not, but Corey Good was a bullshit artist, and he was just going on and on and on. He served in the military early on, but it was like one tour back in the late 80s, and apparently in that one tour in the late 80s, he served 20 years in this secret program. And at the end of that, they teleported him back to his body from the beginning of the program in the late 80s. So he basically is 20 years older than what he currently is, because the aliens transported him back into an earlier body. And, it's absolute horseshit. But a lot of people, especially the UFO community, were like, following him around like he was a rock star, because he was
Right.
telling them everything they ever wanted to know. It was like all the TV shows, Star Trek, Star Wars, Stargate, SG-1, all of the things that you would see on TV. He was just narrating a story, and it was, all horseshit.
Yeah. And Bob did say, he was saying how interesting how many astronauts have commented about the reality of aliens, as well as the Canadian Minister of Defense talking about different species. But yes, with Bob Lazar, and again, I really hope that you folks either go watch more, or maybe you already know, so I'm just going to assume. But Bob Lazar, let me kind of, I guess, fast forward back. So when he comes out, and he immediately starts getting discredited, and so they take away like even his birth certificate. Like even his mom was like scared, like what the hell, what happened to his birth certificate? Like his credentials, all this stuff. So I recently saw a thing where somebody had went back and investigated, and they saw that Bob Lazar was like a C student in high school with just like chemistry and stuff, and then I'm thinking to myself, well, first of all, we know that he was working at Los Alamos, at that Los Alamos like Messon facility as a physicist. I'm pretty sure they're not just going to hire some dude, especially back in 1989. Now, keep in mind, folks, back in 1980, well, actually, it was mid 80s when he was working there. Back in the 80s, okay, degrees actually really meant something. Like that was a big deal.
Yeah.
And companies, you are not going to be a physicist at a company without degrees.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the fact that Los Alamos was saying that he didn't work there, but then they found him in an employee directory. They said he don't work here, but he was in the newspaper saying he was a physicist at Los Alamos. Okay. It shows a cover-up. So once you start seeing a cover-up, then you can't believe the rest of the crap. there's also some other things which, again, was not in this interview that we reviewed, but Bob also talked about these biometric scanners where they put the hands in, the lights come on. There was this whole thing, and back then, that was like cutting edge technology. Was these biometric? Now they're actually outdated, and they're used. They were used in some foreign countries and stuff like that up until a certain point, but we used to use them, and we've had people come out recently and confirm that yes, Bob was right. They did use those there at the Area 51, basically. And so, again, we've had some people coming out recently confirming things that, again, Bob knew. So these are just some more things I wanted to throw out there. But I want to dive into a little bit of the alien discussion right now. We'll kind of ping pong a little bit back and forth with Bob Lazar. One of the accounts, and this is what I'm going to get into you, Stacy, about too, is when he talks about when he got a chance to work. The government loves to compartmentalize, like not, it's not like one team that knows everything about the aircraft as far as the scientists. It's like they had propulsion guys, they had the metallurgy, they had probably weapons guys, avionics guys, all your different specialists that were in their own little 2-man teams or however many, size teams. And in this case, Bob, he was in propulsion along with his lab partner. I think Barry was his name, I believe. Again, Bob Lazar replaced a scientist that had supposedly died or something, but he could openly have a discussion with his lab partner. They could discuss, it's a very limited thing, but they could discuss the propulsion stuff, anything. They could kind of have that free discussion. But when it comes to other things, very compartmentalized and all that stuff. So he worked on a particular model, but he said that there was 9 other ones, and they were different, all different sort of shapes or different models. So that's interesting. I want to get into a little bit of that. But he also said, and I'm going to let you kind of talk about this too, is that there was, from what he had gathered, these were recovered from an archaeological dig. Now, again, keep in mind, folks, that Bob Lazar has always said that some of the information could have been disinformation from the government just to kind of test for leaks and things like that. But from what he gathered, it wasn't something like that was directly told to him. I don't think. I can't remember, but I believe he just was kind of get that thing of like he had overheard or through discussion had found out that these things were recovered from an archaeological. So let's just assume that part of that is true. Stacy, what do you think about that? That 9 or at least or more, maybe there could have been more, were recovered from an archaeological dig.
I think it's probable that's how they got them in the first place. They didn't even know that they existed until one crashed in the desert. And then all of a sudden, they're digging them up in different parts of the world at different depths. You have, many reports coming out of Antarctica. We did a remote viewing session with several people to determine, and it was done blind, of course, because they didn't know what they were going to be remote viewing. But they all came back with huge underground cavern like the size of the Superdome, and they had these massive pillars with strange hieroglyphs on the pillars, and it was very surreal. But all of the artifacts that were there were dating back millions of years, and they looked like they were spaceships. And some of them thought it was Atlantis, some of them thought it was a moon base, whatever, but their target was actually a site in Antarctica.
Right.
So they were actually remote viewing the archaeological digs that have been happening there. And if you believe Buzz Aldrin, when he visited there, he tweeted back, my God, they're here and we're all going to die. And he turns around and dies of a heart attack 3 days later. So, you know, I don't know what you make of that, but he took a picture of one of the mountains in Antarctica that looks like a pyramid. So,
Yeah, and Bob had a question for you, Stacy. He said, "Have you or any of your students remote viewed aliens or other civilized planets?"
yes, that's actually one of the courses I have. That's what we do. I I have them as a assignment do it 4 times, and then they uh, view. You know, I don't want to tell you what the targets are, but uh, we verify alien craft as opposed to CG, pictures. Basically, I show students how to determine what is truth and what is fake. And you can determine it in a remote viewing session what is a real craft, whether it be man made or alien, as opposed to something that is complete horseshit that has been done by CGI or is a false story that has just been created. It doesn't actually exist anywhere in the universe. That's part of the training. And yeah, through remote viewing, I've seen quite a few. So
Now, so as we talk about, well, I do want to comment a little bit about the archaeological dig too. So, I always try to look at the big picture. And when you think about the government somehow had these 9 aircraft. Now, again, I'm saying 9 because that's what Bob Lazar reported. Now, we don't know, and even Bob Lazar will say, he couldn't ask questions all the time. He was only allowed to deal with propulsion. So sometimes, and he said, he did get to go in one of the aircraft because he was able to say, "Hey, look, I need to know how this fits in the aircraft and all that, so I kind of have a better understanding of how this works," which is true. You probably would need to know that. So he was able to go in, and he described low ceilings, that only in the middle could he pretty much stand up. He's 5'10", and there was a couple levels, maybe about 52 feet in diameter, I believe. So they're not overly huge flying saucers. But he described it and all that stuff, and you can check out his descriptions in more depth. But in any case, he talked about 9 of them in different shapes, different sizes. So I think about it like this: is like, first of all, to collect that many. Again, there could have been more. The government could have had like a dozen of these things, or they could have 30 of them, and they have a bunch of them locked away until they figure out these models. There could have been a fleet of each model, like a squadron of each model or something, right? The sport model that Bob Lazar worked on, there could have been a dozen of those. There could have been a dozen of the straw hat ones, a dozen of the Jello mold ones that he described, and so forth and so on. So my point is they could be in a secret alien base in Antarctica. Not to sound super whacked, but guys, I mean, when you start looking at somebody like this and you start seeing that, for the most part, he passed polygraph tests. So he was put through a bombardment of tests. And for the most part, they showed that he was pretty much telling the truth. And the only times that, that was kind of iffy was really due to stress of the situation. Now, so that's why I'm saying, for me, I feel like it had to have been an archaeological dig, because I don't see that us back in even the 80s or earlier shooting these things down, okay, and that many of them, especially with that type of technology. Like, I just don't see us doing that. And if they're using the type of technology that Bob talks about, which we'll talk about a little later, then it probably would have been impossible for us to shoot them down.
Well, on that front, they've discovered, and part of Bob Lazar did a lot of help in this regard. The metal and the propulsion that they have is literally the same thing. The skin, the hull of the ships, and their propulsion come from the same place. It is that metal that is layered in different metals at the atomic level. They're wafered. You have a layer of aluminum, a layer of benzene, a layer of gold, a layer of the, and it's on literally at the atomic level thickness, and it makes the craft incredibly light, durable, strong, because it creates that. We haven't been able to do that until quite recently with graphene, being able to layer things at the atomic level.
Right.
But what they found out is by themselves, those metals, the way that they're layered, is that they're really attracted to any kind of EMF field, a strong EMF field, like high tension power lines. It's like getting caught in a downdraft in an airplane. They may be cruising along, and all of a sudden there's a strong EMF field, and the ship will suddenly shift over to where that EM field is at, and they're constantly crashing into our power lines during heavy storms. There's a lot of the UFO photos that have been taking place are during lightning storms. You'll get a flash in the clouds, and there'll be a UFO sitting in there. It's because as they're flying by that EM field that they're in, the ship literally goes to that. And I don't know whether it's because of it wants to scoop it up for power purposes, or whether it's just drawn to it based off of its materials. But the propulsion system is EM powered.
Well, and it's possible. Now, again, one of the things that they were talking about is that Bob Lazar was saying it was anti-gravity waves. And it forms almost like a heart-shaped gravity type well, and that everything bends around that, like light, time, space, So, but I'm still not sure that the government just happened to catch these things all because of they were all crashing, especially back then.
Yeah,
I'm more prone to believe that, again, and it seems it could coincide with Antarctica, the expeditions and stuff that were going on down there. But and again, we have the South Pole, where our Earth's gravity, it's could be an anomaly along with their anti-gravity spacecraft. Could have, I don't know, or it could have been an area of study for the aliens because of the pole, the South Pole. Who knows? But the point is, I think there was a base somewhere that they probably uncovered. It had probably been abandoned at some point, or maybe not. Who knows? They could have had some dead aliens. Who knows? I mean, there's reports of that stuff. But I think they said, okay, let's take one of each model, right, and let's ship them, put them on a cargo ship, send them back to the States. Let's go out in the middle of the desert where they had all these other testing sites. Because remember, folks, Area 51, Area 52, all that stuff, that whole area of Nevada is multiple test sites, nuclear test sites. They were testing atomic, weapons and stuff. There was so much different testing going on. So, of course, they're naturally going to put these things on a semi or whatever, tarp them up and ship them there in the middle of the night. Or train or whatever, right? They're gonna get them there, or maybe even fly them in. Who knows? But regardless, they got them there, and there's 9 different models. So that's why I think that, because what's just the odds that the aliens would just have multiple different models, like one of each, that the government just happened to capture? It just, to me, logically doesn't seem to make sense. What makes sense is that there was multiple of each version, and that they probably serve different purposes, just like we have different aircraft for different purposes. It's not far-fetched to think that an alien race an advanced alien race would have things that have different purposes.
It could have been like the car industry. What they walked into was an old car museum, and you saw all these different, models over all of these different, as far as aliens were concerned, that may have covered hundreds of years worth of ships, stored in a museum of their own making. But to us, it's like, why do you have all these different kinds of ships?
Right.
When each one has its own level of advancement or style or whatever it is. based off of years of evolution. That's just my theory.
No, I mean,
archaeological dig, which was actually a craft museum for the aliens.
now I do know that. Let's see. I'm trying to see. Now, so somebody also. Sometimes people get caught up on this part too, and people kind of get a little weird. That they're saying that, or Bob had said like that he was basically through different briefings. So remember, there's different briefings, but they never go into super detail about each briefing, just enough to kind of give the scientists an overview of other departments, just in case, things may coincide. So they give each, they gave Bob and his lab partner, again, bits and pieces of different things. And one of those was supposedly these things were from a twin binary star system, Zeta Reticuli.
Mm.
So, some people are like, hey, there's just no extrasolar planets have been found in that system, blah, blah, blah. But folks, remember that, again, sometimes there's disinformation. Bob admitted that back then, okay? Bob Lazar always admitted that, again, some of it could have been disinformation and that some of it he didn't always hold as truth. He could only tell you about the stuff that he knew for sure, that he laid his hands on, that he witnessed for himself. So keep that in mind, folks, that when you are when you're discovering and you're seeking the truth, as I always say, seek the truth, remember those things. Don't just say like, oh, this guy said that they're from the Zeta Reticuli system, and all these other scientists are saying that's impossible. There's no way that there could be intelligent life in that system or any planet. Folks, he didn't say that. He just said that's what he had heard. That's what he was told. But he admitted that may or may not be the case. Bob didn't care. He was excited about the technology. He's a scientist. He doesn't care. He's not a UFO guy, which is something I want to bring up.
Well, and on the Zeta Reticuli thing, only in the last few weeks have we been able to directly look at extrasolar planets with the James Webb. And we're not looking at Zeta Reticuli right now. We're looking at all the stuff that they've been chomping at the bit for the last 20 years to look at, which isn't Zeta Reticuli. All of the extrasolar planets that we've discovered, we really haven't discovered directly. It's been indirectly. And there's no way for them to know whether there's intelligence happening in anywhere right now because we just don't have that technology. So That's for people to debunk Bob Lazar on that front. They're full of shit too, because they're going with half a deck on what information is actually available.
Right. And that's what I wanted to say, folks. Like, just remember, not everything is going to be the way it seems, and especially when they're trying to discredit people. But Terry Lynn, good to see you. I'm glad you finally popped in there. Hi. Okay. So he did talk about, there was about child-sized seats. There was like 3 of them inside the one particular model that he looked at. Could be a family model, could be, and sometimes I would say that, guys, just because there's things resembling seats, it could have been one creature with like 3 different body parts that fit in those things. I'm just saying, like, it doesn't have to be
3 asses,
Yeah, I mean, or 3 tentacle leg things. Who knows? I mean, I don't know. So just, a lot of people say like, oh, it's definitely. But now, there was another report that Bob had said, and again, this is where sometimes people say that Bob saw aliens. Again, folks, he has said, and he always tries to find a logical explanation for some of this stuff. So it's not like he's just throwing this stuff out there. But Lazar said that he was going down a hallway one time, and he saw a couple men in lab coats, and they were facing down talking to something kind of small with long arms. And But he said that he didn't think it was actually aliens. He thought they had just made dolls, like a simulation of what would have potentially fit in those seats to operate those things. So it was like their rendition of making some test dummies or something, you know. So again, that's what I'm saying. It's not always that Lazar is saying that he claimed he saw aliens and things like that. So just keep that in mind, folks. 3 asses. Okay, that could be the case. That's what Terry Lynn said. But here's what I wanted to also cover about the point of Bob Lazar is a lot of times people do things for specific reasons like this. Fame, / attention, money, these type of things. I want to sum this up and say, guys, Lazar to this day doesn't go out and try to make money off this stuff. In fact, even to the point where he didn't go out and do the UFO, the UFO convention circuit. He didn't go out and do that. Now he did appear in one. He finally, like George Knapp, after like 20 years, like convinced him to go and just talk to some people. And even then he was like really nervous and just kind of like, he doesn't crave the attention. Even Bob Lazar said, "Hey, my dad hugged me enough. Okay, I don't need attention." But he also doesn't take money from it. He's rarely done a lot of interviews. He's not plastered all over. He's not out making like millions of dollars off of books and movies. He's turned down things. They just did a documentary recently, finally, but he's turned down all kinds of money and movie deals and all kinds of things. And even when he was on the Joe Rogan podcast, he wouldn't even let the Joe Rogan team pay for his flight. Okay, that's how much he does not really want to profit off this stuff. So, folks, what does that tell you? Again, this guy here, he's really tried to have a private life. And even when he does talk, he will tell you that there's almost some regrets because he almost, to him as a scientist, he was fascinated by this alien technology. So much so that he felt like he got himself kicked off the project. Mm-hmm. And that's like, for him, he almost, that's why he almost has regrets, because he wishes he could have stayed there working on this technology, like, you know, as a scientist, where instead he ends up having to live the next, you know, decades and having his friends and family, you know, some of his friends have, you know, he's had a lot of bad things in his life since coming out. It's not been a bowl of cherries. So that's why I tell you, folks, you know, you can think of what you want to think of this man, but Bob Lazar, I believe, is the real deal. So, and again, went through a lot of discrediting, a lot of the government stuff. And, you know, so yeah, you're going to find people that's going to say, I didn't know Bob. He was a janitor. He's like,
well, in his earlier interviews on Art Bell, you know, getting from being on the project to whistleblower, there were a lot of steps in between that took place. What he had done, because he was really excited about, like you said, the technology that he was dealing with. And he was into photography too at the same time. And he had a lot of friends, you know, this is like college age, who were also into this kind of thing. And he decided he wanted to show them what he'd been working on without telling them what he'd been working on. So they literally did like a lover's lane kind of thing. They went to the top of the mountaintops in a car and just sat there under the stars waiting for shit to come out of the sky, because he knew the schedule of when things were going to, you know, start happening is when they were testing different things. And his friends, of course, were absolutely impressed of all the stuff that was going on. They were taking pictures and different things like that. He made, you know, a lot of brownie points with that. But at the same time, he got caught.
Right.
He got caught doing that, and he read the riot act, and, you know, he actually feared for his life at that point. And when the government pushed him so hard that they were going to basically disappear him entirely, he decided the only way to save himself was to go public with it. And that's when he contacted George Knapp, and they went over the whole thing together and the report that you just saw.
Right.
But he did where he went wrong was trying to show off to his friends the stuff that he was, doing, and they took pictures. They, was trying to impress a new girl, all this other kind of stuff. Typical, guy stuff, letting your wee do your thinking for you, and ended up getting thrown off the project doing it. So
right. And the thing is like the government has playbooks, right? They knew, like, they were like, hey, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. Bob did it. Then they're like, oh, hey, blah, blah, blah. And, oh, your wife's having an affair on you. All that stuff. And, like, all these things. And then they were like, oh, you went public? Oh, so, well, we can't kill you. But guess what? Now we're going to discredit you and make you a non-person. So there's always a playbook for the government to do these things. So Bob saved his life probably, but he also, unfortunately, the government has a playbook, and he had to live with the other consequences. So no matter what he had to face consequences of everything. So
nowadays they added another level to that. They don't just unperson you, because today that's almost impossible to do anyway. To unperson someone, they have to add to your life. So they'll reinvent your whole life history, and you were in the psych ward, and you're a crazy person. You exposed yourself to children in front of a school, and you've got porn on your hard drive. They have a whole other level to ruining your life. Ask Scott Ritter, the UN weapons inspector,
and even Bob Lazar did actually has criminal charges that came later on, and then it was actually they had said something about later on. They said something like, well, due to his criminal charges, he basically was like discredited on some stuff. It's like, well, yeah, but that was all after the fact in that sense. So, like, how can you say that? Anyways, again, this is that typical, disinformation. And every so often, just when people start thinking, whenever he starts gaining some credibility, element 115, well, then they come out and then somebody says, well, yeah, it's easy for him to predict element 115 because of the way the element charts work. And now we're up to 118. And he said, and so the guy was being a smartass. He was like, well, I predict element 120, and, blah, 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 blah. Well, of course, anybody can predict that. But the fact that it does exist, and Bob had already explained how it works and the stable form of things, even though there's an unstable form of it. Anyways, the point is that they were so worried about trying to discredit him. Every time something comes out in the future, then they've got to get some guy that says, this guy here, he's pro UFO. He wants Bob to be real. But he said that he looked it up, and he went to high school and only had a C average and only took chemistry. And he looked it up and all this other stuff. Look, folks, you can say all you want now. It's too late. Once we saw back then, you look at the time capsule, you'll see the truths. You see where they said, no, he doesn't work here. Mm-hmm. Then when we find out he does, what does that tell you? Once you start lying and cover stuff up, then why? Like, if he really was just some nobody, mm-hmm. why would he even have to cover up anything? They could just been like, no, he was a janitor, or he was a contractor.
He still had some check stubs from the paycheck that he was getting, and the account that they were coming from inside the military had a special code attached to it that it was coming out of this particular account. And one of the UFO investigators that you see from MUFON didn't recognize that code. He knew it was a military code, but he didn't recognize it as being one particular department or another. So he went to a guy that one of his old colonels or whatever, and asked him, and he didn't know. And he got on the phone to the Pentagon and asked, and then he came back in, and his face was white, and he's like, I cannot divulge what that program is for, what that money is for. And if I ever say anything again, they promise to shoot me in the head. So this is a colonel, full bird, telling his friend, I can't, he freaked out people at the Pentagon and who freaked him out when he was just asking about what is this code on this payroll? What is that?
Right.
And Bob Lazar, that was his check stub. You can't just make that stuff up and have a paper trail that leads there. So,
right. And I just find it really interesting. And I tell people, like, folks, you have to go pull up some more interviews where he goes in depth. Watch the Joe Rogan thing. I cannot express that enough. I feel like that he really gave a good sense of detail as he walked through like some of his first days at work, and going through that process, meeting his lab partner, working on all the different experiments or talking about them at least, because even Joe Rogan asked him like, hey, what did you do like every day? Like, what was it like each day? Was but he said that they would do experiments on this anti-gravity propulsion system or anti-gravity wave type system. But he said like, they activated it and the thing was hovering there and he was like trying to push on it. And it was like a force field, almost like two opposing magnets, this anti-gravity thing. And he was trying to, and I just find it funny because I've seen some other modern scientists that talk about, well, based on what we know and this and that. No, folks, this is technology that we don't know. That's the whole point. And even Bob said that currently the military obviously has been trying to figure this stuff out. And the best way that he put it, and this is what I love, is Bob said it's like taking like some kind of I think he said like a nuclear reactor type, like a little mini nuclear fusion thing or whatever the hell he said, and putting it back in the Victorian era. Or I think he even said, or even like you could take like a motorcycle and stick back in the old Western days or something, right? Or the old days. Mm-hmm. And sure, they're gonna gather around it. He said, if you leave the keys in it, right? At some point, somebody will figure out how to turn the key. And they will figure out how to start up the motorcycle. Mm-hmm. They would figure out how to ride the motorcycle. But it doesn't mean that they're going to make the plastic fenders. It doesn't mean that they're going to go and be able to re-engineer this. It's past their time. Or when he was talking about the nuclear thing in the Victorian area or something, it's like, yeah, they'll start messing with it. They'll eventually crack it open. Then people will die of radiation. Somebody else will come in. They'll die from the exposure, trying to check on those people that died. And he's like, it's technology that's beyond their time frame yet. Just like this technology from these aliens is, part of this time frame in our lives. We can't understand it yet. We can play with it. We can fly with it. And he talked about test flights. We just can't truly crack it open and understand it yet.
Yeah. And for whatever reason, the technology itself is thought-based. There's no joystick, there's no yoke, there's no throttle. You think it and it moves. It's really futuristic kind of stuff. We're just now developing devices that will read our brain waves and then act upon it. And that's where Neuralink is going and all of that other kind of stuff. But this was back in the 80s when no one was thinking how that stuff even existed, could exist. Bob Lazar was saying, yeah, it's there. They figured that much out, but they just don't really know how it all works. So he's, like I said, at number 10 on the truth scale.
Right.
It's these other ones that have come out lately that have been trying to, make a lot of money, become famous. They're parasites. They're not doing anybody any favors.
What I found fascinating. What, honey? I can't hear her. She's saying something in there. I don't know. Anyway, so I don't know what she was saying. Oh, well, you guys were having your own conversation in the comments. So, but yeah, she was just asking if I was going to read the comment. But anyway, so getting me sidetracked here. But no, I guess Bob. Now you got me all fucked up now. Like I was talking about all this stuff, and then you guys over there getting in some political discussion stuff over there. I don't even know. Like the ultimate discrediting. You voted for a Democrat. She said, Taylor said, like, hell I did. I voted for Trump all the way. He said, good vibes, laughing. So my voice. So, but in any case, all right. Trying to refocus here. But no, what I wanted to talk about on the UFO alien stuff is the test flight. So I thought it was pretty cool that it seems to be like through when you start kind of hearing when Bob Lazar talks about his time at work, it's like a little bit of a buddy system. So I'm sure that his lab partner, Barry, of course, Barry was like the veteran. He had been there before him. So he was kind of like the mentor. And so, of course, when they would come in to have these guys do something, they'd be like, hey, come check out this thing going on. Oh, and, bring Bob, that kind of thing. So they would go and they got to see one of the test flights. He said that, they basically like lifted off the ground and kind of, moved around, things like that. But he said that there was somebody inside. He could hear them communicating. He even saw the frequency of the VHF, radio, frequency, which, Bob was kind of like, what the heck? Like, how are they even doing? If he's like in an anti-gravity field there, how's the radio even getting through? But he was like, okay, well, they must have figured out how or something, But so it was interesting when he talked about this thing. He said that when it lifted up, he said you just heard a little bit of corona discharge, so a little bit of static, and almost like a blue aura from that electric kind of discharge or something, I guess, at the ground. But then once it kind of really cleared up just a few feet, it was pretty much like silent, So that's almost scary in a way because we always have sound effects in the movies, whether it's even if it's like a woo, something, like woo, like the old sound effects. But there's always something, right? But the thing that these things could be so silent like that's even scary, and that would also explain why they can kind of move around and be in your backyard undetected until you walk out there and then they take off. But
yeah, well, that's the big indicator with the man-made as opposed to alien-made tech is the sound. We haven't figured out how to make it no sound, completely stealth like that. So we've got man-made ships in the military that do almost everything these ships will do, but they make noise. They make that whirring sound, or they vibrate windows, different things like that. They actually create sound. The true blue alien stuff is, spooky quiet. And that's the consistency from all the reports that come up, people who talk about what they've seen. If it's really quiet, they never heard it, that's real alien tech. If it's, they heard it coming, like in Phoenix, they heard it. The Phoenix lights, right. Until it was directly overhead, then it was quiet. But as it passed, they could hear it again. That meant that probably wasn't alien tech. It was probably man-made tech that they were testing. And for whatever reason, decided they want to freak out a whole city.
Well, Bob said, what's your take on the supposed alien exchange program? Now,
yeah, that's Corey Good, his bullshit. If we have an alien exchange program, it's probably not voluntary. Maybe,
I don't know. I guess, again, I'm trying to look today again, and I know Bob likes to talk aliens, and that's cool, and I definitely don't mind. I'm really trying to focus today, especially on assuming like if what Bob Lazar said is real, then what Bob is saying, that we at least have 9 or more alien spacecraft that we know how to use or fly at least. And of course, apparently they do advanced test flights. They were doing them every Wednesday. That's how, Stacy, you said that he got caught, right? When he was going out there taking his buddies. They eventually even get the RV out there. I think he said at one point, like they got real cocky, and then that's when they got busted. But they were even doing advanced test flights on these things. So, and we're talking, again, because of the anti-gravity that forms its own gravity, its own little mini planet, it's like there's no inertia effect. So these things can go and turn on a dime on a 90-degree turn. And the people inside, our mind, we're like, man, you die. Like you get slammed up against the wall. But again, they're like in their own planet, their own gravity. So there's the inertia doesn't affect them like that. To them, it's just like, there's no in that. So
once you have control of gravity, you have control of time and space, because that's what gravity is. It's time. Time and gravity are the same thing. We just think they're different because we called them two different things. If you're able to manipulate gravity, you can slice out space like a cookie cutter, and your cookie is independent of everything else going on around it. And the propulsion at that bubble or the edge of the cookie is what is actually moving things around. It's not inside the cookie. It's like being a fly in a 747. You don't affect the aerodynamics of the plane at all, because a fly is flying around inside a 747. It's the same effect with the UFOs.
Right. And so but what I was saying is that we know that these things, that we can use them or at least fly around it with them. So, but apparently Bob's like, look, other than that, we really still, and he says that probably even to this day, they're still trying to figure out how it works, how to create these gravity waves and how to create this thing, because there's still so much about gravity that we cannot do. We can't generate gravity yet. We cannot do that yet, but they've been trying to figure this out. Mm-hmm. So, and that's probably another reason why he was brought in. They're like, hey, this dude is a physicist at Los Alamos who built a jet-powered Honda. This guy was driving around in a Honda that he put a jet motor in, and was like, look, this guy thinks outside the box, and so he was brought in and said, hey, can you figure this shit out, also. So they were bringing in, obviously you can tell they've been sort of bringing in scientists here and there trying to figure out how these things work and, stuff like that. And again, they've probably had accidents, supposedly. I'm sure that there may have been more than 9 of these, or again, there could be those 9 specific models, and maybe whenever one of them gets messed up, they bring in another one of that model from the main storage, like the main base back in Antarctica or something, or wherever, Yep. But that's why I say Antarctica, because again, there was a lot of mysterious stuff that happened down in Antarctica, and it would be the one place where you could have a massive archaeological discovery, and a lot of people wouldn't know, or it'd be because, in America, even back in the 40s or 50s, I mean, if there was something on a mass level like that, it would have been spread around more. I mean, even Roswell made the rounds, and that was just a crash. So if there was a large archaeological discovery somewhere in like a modern continent, a civilized continent, I think we would have at least had more reports about that. That's why I think Antarctica would be the prime suspect for an archaeological discovery on that magnitude. So that's just my take on that. But I think it's super cool to think about that stuff. And So here's a theory: is since these were an archaeological discovery, do they have to be aliens from another planet, or could this be another ancient civilization that was advanced here on Earth and collapsed and we're reset?
Yeah,
You know?
it could have been. It could have been literally, because we're just talking about time and space, a future civilization that crashed, or they decided to go someplace and ended up crashing in the past. That they are us in the future, but we're in the past. When you're dealing with time and space, there really are no limits to what could happen. I mean, they found a sledgehammer petrified in rock in London, Texas, and it was a modern sledgehammer, and it was carbon dated to around 2.5 million years ago. How in the hell does a modern sledgehammer with a wooden handle and petrified in rock from 2 million years ago get there? Well, chance something opened up and threw it through time, but it's these kinds of, they found a spark plug inside of a geodude. Those things are millions of years old. It takes them to form. And how do you get a spark plug inside of a rock like that?
Right.
Things have to not be of the norm in order for that kind of, and we probably got stuff like that all over the place. We just don't even pay attention to it because it's just so weird. We're like, nah, I'm not going to even touch that. No, not even going to go there. And they just move on. It also in Texas, there was an aliens craft that crashed, and a little town, it was like Little House on the Prairie kind of stuff. They tried to heal the alien that had crashed. He died, and they buried him in their own cemetery. And this was in the newspaper in the late 1800s. They just, as a matter of fact, this is what it is. An alien, died on Jericho's farm, and we had to bury him in our cemetery. And, nobody said boo about it because it was just a little too weird. They didn't even talk about conspiracies or UFOs or anything like that. But he was doused with radiation to the point where anybody who went near his grave, even the well water that was near his grave, became radioactive and cancerous. So they had to seal that up. It's one of these things where when you're dealing with time and space, you don't know the exact origin just because it landed in the late 1800s. Could have been us in the future. And given the way that we are testing genetics, I wouldn't be surprised. So,
right. And, even Lazar was talking about that if you were able to create these like gravity devices, that it's possible because gravity bends time and space and everything. And he didn't necessarily say time machine stuff, but maybe the application could ultimately be used in that sense, because we know that gravity does affect and bend the light, bend time, bend space. That's why we can see stars behind the sun, things like that, stars that normally would be visible. And because the sun generates such a large gravity mass, again, it bends and we can actually see around and behind the sun. So things like that's pretty wild, to wrap your head around at times. But if this technology does exist, maybe these aliens were from another time frame, or again, maybe some of these objects that get thrown through time. I don't know. I mean, unless like the spark plug was like a modern brand, like a Champion spark plug or something, like, hey, how did this? Man, Champion's been around a while or something, like AC Delco? What the hell?
yeah, no, they couldn't get any name brand off of it. Some guy was just a rock collector. He cut a geode in half, and he looked at it, and it's like, what the hell is this? Because he cut the spark plug in half too. It was white with a metal core.
Right.
It's ceramic white with a metal core, and he couldn't tell what it was. So he, put it back together, held it together, and went and had it X-rayed, and he saw the whole spark plug inside the X-ray. It left it at that, but it's now logged into archaeology, forbidden archaeology. Different things that you're not supposed to know about or fall out the approved timeline of how civilization came about. The London Hammer is in there too, because you can't have a half petrified wooden handle embedded in rock, and it's literally a regular old sledgehammer head, and say that cavemen, they figured it out. No, that's how it works. We weren't even walking upright 2 million years ago, so
supposedly. Who knows?
Supposedly.
And that's the crazy thing when we start getting into carbon dating things. And I think, and Bob also brought up a question about, what do you think of the odds of full disclosure about aliens in our lifetime? I mean, when the government recently did this mass UFO dump on information, I still don't feel like it's the truth. I feel like it was almost like they had a department that collected everything about UFOs, and it's almost like their monitoring department. Like, they were monitoring all this stuff about UFOs to make sure that they could kind of keep everything contained. And then when they said, hey guys, we need to dump some info, it's like, okay, fuck it. Here, take the monitoring department. But the true UFO stuff, that's not going to be released. I mean, I'm sorry,
too much power. If that tech.
Right, and like Stacy said earlier, if there's like this, government, the shadow government, whatever, that you saw even in the video during that Congress trial or whatever, during the Congress in that Senate meeting, when they were like, well, they asked the military, well, like, whose authority is higher than the military, and they're just like, we'll have to tell you in a closed door session. It's like, what? I mean, that should be huge for people to try to wrap their head around. They could have said like the president or anything else, you know what I mean? No, they're like, we have to tell you in secrecy. And like they said that shit out loud. So it's like a secret that's not a secret. So
it's the Majestic 12. They've been behind a lot of the fuckery that's been going on since, literally since Roswell.
So that's what I'm saying. Like, they're not going to allow those secrets to come out. So yeah, you might see that outer layer that they dangle out there, they throw out there as that carrot. They're just like, just give them all the observation stuff, And
well, I will say this: if it's a psyop, because one of the things that Werner von Braun, the guy who basically invented NASA and the U-2 rocket for the Nazis and all this other stuff, he told his secretary before he died that he was afraid that, when all of the other wars are, not applicable, if they want to start a war that's not really a war, they're going to fake a UFO invasion, an alien invasion. And he says that they've already got the tech in order to fake it and fool anyone that a UFO invasion is actually taking place. And to them, the military has a series of fundraisers whenever they start running out of money. And this is on deck at some point to be basically pull the trigger to have this kind of a fundraiser. Like 9/11 was a fundraiser. What's going on in Ukraine is a fundraiser. It's how the military funds itself when it starts running out of money. And he said the UFO, and this was back in the late 70s, that this was eventually going to happen. Attack from space was the idea.
Yeah, and I'm trying to see if I can find something for you guys here, since you were talking about that stuff. Bob, I didn't see your gold chair found in coal. I wanted to see.
That was in a coal mine outside Chicago.
I'm just trying to. Research here. The London Hammer. So you guys can see here, just to get a visual right here.
Yeah, that's something you'd find in the 49ers when they were digging for gold.
Yeah, and supposedly there's a 400 million year old hammered explained video, but we won't get into that. That's a different subject, but I would say definitely that's pretty cool though. Another photo of it. And you can see here clearly, it's there's no doubt about it. It's not something that looks like one, or you can see clearly the wood going through, just like
the wood in the stone down below. It's actually partially petrified.
Right. So yeah, I'll definitely have to check more into that. I think that's pretty cool. So, I like seeing things like that. Whenever we come across that type of stuff, I think it's pretty cool. I think we've even talked about the some of the other things, but and I like this shit here too. And this is something I wanted to show. I know we're getting a little off subject, but even like the ancient computer, that was found, and this thing's like over 20,000 years old or something like that.
Yeah, before math was invented, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I mean this thing's got gears and everything else, and I believe this is like this gold thing. I believe is the computerized, like. So we're talking about something. I mean, look at this. We're talking over 20,000 years old, and even if you just think of that as a remake. Now, this is a 2,000-year-old device, referred to the oldest computer. So I don't know if they updated the age of this thing, but before they were talking about this being more like 20,000 years old. Now, apparently, they're saying 2,000. But I would even argue to say, hell, even 2,000 years ago, you look at something like this, right at the time of Christ. I mean, look at this. That is pretty amazing. So, I don't know. There's just some things I thought was pretty fascinating about that. So, anyways, guys. So, as we kind of get toward the back end of this, I just wanted to talk a few more comments on Bob Lazar. And again, folks, I encourage everybody to go there, keep an open mind, but go watch some of his stuff. And go watch when he describes. Go watch the Joe Rogan thing. Seriously, guys, he gets into a lot of good detail on that. And you'll notice again, there was things that came out later to vindicate him in some regards. Now there is also a new documentary on Netflix. I have not seen it because I don't usually have Netflix. But there is a new documentary. I think it's called like Bob Lazar, Area 51 and UFOs or something like that. I don't know. But I'm sure if you type in Bob Lazar documentary, Netflix, I'm sure you'll find it. But apparently, and this was like a labor of love. The guy that did this, who made the documentary, believe it or not, when he first started to make this, he really wanted to tell the story, but like every time he was researching and really diving into some things, and by the way, there's some other things that was revealed that Bob just found out too. Some things that were like just revealed. But anyways, so when this guy, this director or whatever title he is, when he was making this documentary, he said that there was things that he would be like, okay, well, maybe I'm going to catch Bob lying at some point. Maybe doing all my research, I'm going to, but the problem is that every time he kept digging in deeper and deeper, it just kept validating Lazar's story. And even the guy that made the documentary became a true Lazar believer, and but I think
at the end too.
Huh?
Joe Rogan was at the end too. He talked about it in several episodes after the fact. That there was crazy things that were being said. He says, but this guy he's not lying. I can tell when someone's lying. He's not lying. He's telling the truth. And which is what I've been saying for, since the 90s. But,
I've been saying it. I've been saying it for 10 damn years.
Well, everything with Joe Rogan that's crazy, man. That's crazy. And that's how he gets his audience with that. But he was really impressed with Bob Lazar, and all he did was just say it as it is, and stuck to his original stories. He said, "This is what I know, not what I believe."
Right. So. And that's what I always appreciated about someone like him, is that he didn't try to just and he pretty much would clarify his opinions. He'd be like, "Look, this is just my opinion. It's not the fact. The only thing I do know is this. But, based on that, this could be and he might offer some speculations." But he was so fascinated in the technology, he wasn't big into UFOs and aliens and all that stuff. He was big into the technology, even though it was from another world. For him, that didn't truly matter to him. He was just kind of like, yeah, whatever. But the technology, oh my God, I'm a scientist. I love it. This is so cool. This is not what we know. This is not possible in any technology that we have. And I want to know more, that type of thing. So I just find all of that stuff very credible, the things that he described. And again, if you go back in there, he's not, don't just sit there and say that every single thing he's saying is fact. He will tell you the things that he saw for sure, what he believes it was, and he's even realistic about it. Again, when he saw the little alien dudes, he didn't just jump and say, "Yeah, I think I saw aliens there too." No, he was like, they were probably a recreation of the size of the aliens, and like a test dummy kind of thing. So even he's realistic about these things as well. So it just adds even more credibility, the fact that he hasn't been profiting, and he hasn't been making all kinds of movies and books and stuff over the years, and that he's really actually suffered more than living some kind of lavish lifestyle from it. So that just all, to me, lends to the credibility of everything. And also too, by the way, and this is one other thing I wanted to kind of get into real quick too as we wrap up, but folks, if you remember some of the U.S. Navy footage recently aired out there about UFOs,
the
Tic Tac stuff and everything, guys, this is some stuff. This is what Bob was talking about, the way these things behave, the way it pivots and turns and flies and all these things. Again, folks, this is stuff that also starts lining up with these type of things. So it's amazing to think about. It's amazing to think about life or technology beyond what we know, whether it's actual aliens or whether it's some other form of civilization that was here millions of years ago. Who knows? And those things may have sat in some underground, snowed over maybe even before it was like a frozen tundra type thing, like Antarctica, maybe back when it was tropical or whatever. But eventually, when the climate changes and all those things or whatever happened, hey, who knows? These things could have been, they could have had a base on Antarctica and was studying dinosaurs and shit. We don't even know. Like, they could have been there, like Antarctica, flying around our planet, studying dinosaurs, and like, this is cool, studying this shit. And then, boom, along comes a fucking meteor, blows shit up or something. They're like, we got to get out of here, leave the base. This is a planet killer. We need to get off this base, or abandoned thing. And they probably had their head in, who knows, that could have been a plausible explanation, is when the dinosaurs had their big moment, the aliens had to get the hell out and left behind their shit, and was covered up for all this time until we uncovered it.
Well, due to continental drift, Pangea was
right,
when the dinosaurs were hit, and Antarctica was north of where Australia is at. It was like almost into India, into China, that whole area, and it has drifted to where it is now. So I mean, this base could have been essentially much closer to the equator
right,
than what it's currently sitting at. So
right. Well, that's what I meant, like when it was like tropical or whatever, and but that's what I'm saying though. They could have been there. That could have been somewhat of a safe place for them. They found a cave, a big cave system that they were able to clear of dinosaurs. Maybe they had some anti-gravity shields or some shit, because I think even Bob talked about how this technology would do everything to shame as far as like with anti-gravity stuff. If you can harness that type of power as a species, you can have shields like in sci-fi and stuff. You can have a lot of protections, like, so it's possible that their base was protected. But of course, when this meteor, or when they had this planetary event that caused the dinosaurs to be extinct, they're like, we got to go. We got to go, because even their shields they didn't want to just be trapped there. They had to go, so they just left everything. And over the millions of years, whatever. But again, those spaceships were probably not tarnished with the materials that they're made of, or who knows, maybe they were in some type of gravity field when we came across them and we were able to penetrate that. I don't know. There's a lot to unravel in that mystery, but I just was throwing out my little theory. I just popped in my head when you were talking about, I was like, well, these things could have been there for a few million years or whatever. So who knows? I don't know, but it's pretty interesting. Is there anything that you want to wrap it up on with some of your final thoughts on the whole Bob Lazar and alien technology? And
well, eventually he's going to be completely exonerated, because eventually a lot of this stuff is going to come out and he's going to be shown right. Whether he lives to see that day, I don't know. But it is getting to the point to where people are just really tired of the government's bullshit, and they want to know, because we're not going to move forward as a species until we do. We're just so caught up in our own narcissism on so many different levels that we need something to go beyond ourselves, out into space, because that's what we are. We're explorers. And, right now people are just exploring all the different genders that are available. We need to start exploring the stars instead. And that's only going to happen if these fuckknuckles at Majestic 12 actually cough up real information for us.
yeah, I mean, there was a big push for Mars, and it was all about Mars for a while there. They were like, hey, this is the next big thing, man. Mars and everything else. And there was, and what I find fascinating though, and I don't want to, this could be probably a whole nother episode about Mars, but if you really think about Mars, I mean, God, I just opened up a can of fucking worms. I realize that, but just think about this though. Like with Mars, to me, it's like we had some movies, right? The Matt Damon. There was a few other ones. There was like movies. There was talk of like actual manned missions to to launch and on their way and all this stuff, all these things. And we sent up those rovers, and we were getting back some images, even some high def images. Well, then it was almost like the community, right? The online community that we are, the armchair detectives, started to really dig into some of these images and was like, there's some shit here. Like, that doesn't seem natural, right? And it's almost like all of a sudden Mars faded in the background. Like, once it seems like every time we start cracking shit open, because the government's like, hey, because the government loves distractions, right? Hey, look at the shiny Mars thing. We got astronauts and movies, and like, this is fun, right? Keep looking at this while we do some shady shit in the background. But hey, look at the Mars. And then when we do, and we're like, hey, we're looking up close. Hey, wait a minute. This looks like a red version of Arizona. Wait, huh? What? I don't know. But we start seeing this shit. And they're like, oh, actually, don't look at it. Never mind. You know what? Fuck Mars. You know what? How about do you guys want to riot? You want to riot about something? Riot about something. I don't know. It's like they just move on to the next thing and try to distract you with the next shiny object. Well, actually, forget that. So, I mean, Mars, man, that's like, because I remember it was like all so big, but then I think even Terry Lynn and I were both looking at it, and I think even both of us were looking at some of these images and how people were pointing out just faces, pyramids, possible straight line structures type stuff, and that may have existed. And of course, maybe not right now, but a collapsed society that may have been there at one time, and how they talked about maybe Mars had a actual atmosphere, and things like that. And
Remote viewed that too. 1 million BC, there were people there, and they were dealing with another situation where they basically had a massive asteroid hit the planet and not only destroyed the atmosphere, but disrupted the electromagnetic field. So whatever was left of the atmosphere basically got blown off with solar winds. And without an electromagnetic field, the planet is unlivable. The alien species, which really didn't look that much different than the Greys that we talk about, weren't really all that interested in Earth at the time. They just decided to leave, the whole system.
Yeah. And, and if you really, I don't know, like my thought could be, well, what if these were the ones that came to Earth? What if they came to Earth, landed what they had left of their ships, they landed, and they couldn't survive on our planet, and they ended up, that might be how we came across their shit. It's like they came here, they landed, they tried to survive, but maybe differences in atmosphere or things like that, who knows, or they just couldn't. Maybe again they might not have been, I don't know, but that's always another possibility of if you tried to tie the two together. And when you're talking about that time frame, and maybe when Mars was no longer usable, they had to evacuate and take whatever was left from their disaster. And so Debbie says, bunch of crap. They don't have the cameras or even the machine to make it there. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you can look at the conspiracy theories of that we never even sent anything there, and that some of it's like a, color corrected version of, Arizona and things like that. There's been some conspiracy theorists that's taken some images. They also did it with the moon, though. So they've taken a few shots of Arizona and lined them up pretty good with, the moon, some images of the moon. I mean, these are all conspiracy theories that we could do a full show on for sure. But my biggest thing tonight was, folks, Bob Lazar and the aliens. And I feel like, to me, I don't feel like that's actual conspiracy stuff. I think that these craft exist. I think that they have been doing testing. It all makes sense. And, so, and I would say that we haven't figured out how to use that technology just yet. I think we can play with it, just like most of us can go out and drive a car, but you may not understand how to build it from scratch or something, that kind of thing. Whereas I think that, we know how to use these UFOs. Like, obviously we did test flights with them, according to Lazar. But as far as actually taking apart the main engine, so to speak, these three components, these anti-gravity wave, machines, we still have no clue on how they actually work and those type of things. So I do believe that. But other than that, guys, it's going on almost a 2-hour show tonight. So I hope you guys enjoyed this show. I had fun. I really wanted to tackle this subject and talk about and take a look at Bob Lazar from 2022 and what we've learned now and looking back on things. And here's another fun little kind of fact. Guys, this man's story has not changed over the years. So, take that nugget for what it's worth. Mm-hmm. All right. So for those of you, if you're not real familiar with the Lazar story, go look them up. Just don't get sucked into some of the naysayers. Again, everybody wants to try to disprove things, and it's not healthy. But just listening to him talk about and describe when he worked at S4 and being able to touch the aircraft, being able to be inside the aircraft, a lot of that stuff's really cool. So I would say definitely go check it out.
It's hard to keep your story straight after 30 years of telling the story, especially when people try and throw you a monkey wrench. I mean, just if you don't believe me, ask Amber Heard on how hard it is to keep a story.
Right. I know that's funny. Like, I get daily, I get probably at least 1 or 2 updates for sure a day from Terry Lynn, because she's been following that a lot. And so if there's some really good moments, and of course there's a ton of memes, a ton of videos. So she'll hit me up with some of those at least a few times a day. So
yeah, she's ruined herself. It's a rod of her own making at this point. The only job she's ever going to get in the future is porn, just because Hollywood blacklisted her.
Well, good. I mean, that whole situation, but anyways, folks, I hope you enjoyed the show. If you didn't get the chance to see the beginning where we really dive into and listen to Bob Lazar himself, go back, watch that. So other than that, remember, we do this every Thursday night around 9 p.m. Whether we have a guest on here, whether it's just Stacy and I talking about some cool topics like tonight. But folks, we're definitely going to have something interesting next week for sure. I mean, whatever it is, we'll make it interesting. Trust me, we're going to dive into some things. And as far as anything coming up in the future, don't forget Stacy over here. He's got courses on remote viewing. He's talked about it. And if you go back and watch this, if you didn't watch the whole thing, okay, but if you go back and watch the show, which I encourage you to, you're going to hear Stacy talk about some of the stuff they did remote viewing. If you want to learn that, he's got the courses. Go to Udemy, look up Stacy Talich. The courses are amazing. I'm telling you, I had the pleasure of taking the remote viewing course myself. Never completed it, I admit, but I will. I will get to it at some point. But I did get to a point, and I loved it, and I cannot stress enough how awesome it is. And also Paranormal Underground Magazine. I'm just trying to get all the things at the last minute here that you guys need to know. Paranormal Underground Magazine. Don't forget, Bob Fountain he contributes to that magazine. I don't know if he's still contributing to it, but regardless, he was a major contributor to it, and it's a great magazine. It'll come to your email once a month. It's absolutely free, especially when you go to them and say, hey, Josh sent me from the Everything Paranormal show. They're going to hook you up for a year of showing up to your email on the first of every month, full of great stuff, fully illustrated. So definitely Paranormal Underground magazine. And, that's about it. Other than you guys, my show Para Explorers, which you can find on Paraflix. That's we're getting close. We're about to release episode 2. And shortly after that, 3 and 4 all have been filmed and on the books, so to speak. So we've got 3 episodes this week coming out over the next month and a half. So I cannot wait until you guys see all those. And I'm gonna share one thing with you guys on one of them for sure. We got some big guest stars, and on one of them we have an amazing Class A EVP that I can't wait for you guys to hear. I'm not even going to describe it to you. I just want you guys when you hear this EVP, and we may have more. I don't even know. We haven't even fully reviewed all the evidence yet on our investigations. But and Terry Lynn, she, to give her credit, she's like the one that discovers these things, because what happens, folks, I'll go film like Para X, and like I'll get a mission, and then I have to go film, and then whenever I get back with all the footage like from the investigations, I just put another copy on like a little disc, and I just give them to Terry Lynn and say, hey, because she's like really good at doing the real detective work stuff. So then she'll like write down all the little notes and all the timestamps, and she's like, oh, there's this, and this, and this. And then when I do the editing, that's when I can be like, use the roast and go. And then I hear it, and I'm like, oh my God, that's cool. Like that's cool EVP, whatever. So anyways, folks, so there's some really good stuff. She's been doing some great work finding the stuff. Do what? Oh, yeah. So, but so anyways, she's amazing, folks. She's my wife. She's my soulmate. She's my partner. She's everything to me. So, yes, guys, I cannot wait for you guys to see what we have for you on these episodes. So other than that, I think I covered all the future normal stuff, and you should have all the links in the comments below. If I forget the links, I'll go, I'm going to go in there and try to make sure the links, but if I forget them for some reason, you can always find them in previous videos too as well. So other than that, guys, Stacy, any last minute things?
No, we're good.
All right. Well, folks, we'll see you next week, Thursday at 9 p.m. Thanks, Bob, Debbie, Terry Lynn, everybody that showed up live. And for those of you that watched the replays, again, thank you so much. We love you guys, and we will see you next week, Thursday, 9 p.m. Eastern. And remember, folks, seek the truth.
Peace.